I'm Jessica Green, and together with Reverend Dr. Zena Jacques and Claire Nelson, we welcome you to Courageous Conversations, presented by Urban Consulate and Barrington's White House. I see a lot of familiar names, but maybe new faces to Courageous Conversations, so we are so thrilled to have you here. And to all of you who are here regularly, thank you for coming back. Zena says you are all welcomed and you are needed here. We gather monthly on second Wednesdays to explore how to foster greater inclusion and belonging and build courageous community together. Oh, the poll just jumped right in front of me. Excuse me. We've talked about everything from the science of fear and bias to understanding privilege, confronting prejudice, challenging separation, cultivating curiosity, what it's like to stand in another's shoes, repairing our social contracts, and practicing revolutionary love, healing, and reconciliation. We do a lot of work here. Our topic for tonight is something that comes up over and over again in our conversations, so we're super eager to explore this together. I know I have a lot of learning to do. This question of when we encounter biased attitudes or behaviors, what do we do? Do we call in for conversation? Or do we call out for prejudice? Or do we do a bit of both? How can we invite learning and growth without shaming? How can we receive feedback ourselves on our own blind spots? That's a lot, and I'm really excited to dig into this tonight. This can all be really challenging for all of us. I know it is for me, and it's where our theories get tested in practice. Many of us avoid these discussions entirely because we fear that conversations about bias and discrimination lead to feelings of discomfort, and we want to lean into being courageous. To share tonight what we mean by calling in and out, here are some words from activist Ngoc Luan Chan, who started having conversations with fellow community organizers a decade ago. They say, I picture calling in as a practice of loving each other enough to allow one another to make mistakes. I don't propose practicing calling in opposition to calling out. I don't think that our work has room for binary thinking and action. However, I do think that it's possible to have multiple tools, strategies, and methods existing simultaneously. It's about being strategic, weighing the stakes, and figuring out what we're trying to build and how we're going to build it together. The important thing is not to be silent. Whether calling in or out, or finding another way to approach the situation, we've got to speak up. And as Dr. King said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. If you participated in our Confronting Prejudice session a year ago, and I know some of you did, or watched the video or read the recap on our website, which we recommend, the topic might feel similar. But we want to make a distinction, or rather an expansion. In that session, the amazing Janan Mohajer from Interfaith Youth Corps gave us great tools for how to be an upstander, to respond in an active situation of hate or discrimination when you witness someone being harmed, or when you want to stand in solidarity with them after. Tonight, we want to expand on this. We like to build on our themes. And so we want to think about how we approach everyday courageous conversations with our friends, our family, and colleagues. Not just at the most extreme or egregious words or actions, but also the mistakes and misunderstandings that happen when we come together across difference to create more inclusive communities. Tonight, we're thrilled to welcome my friend David Bailey. He's joining us from Santa Barbara, California. His organization, Arabon, located in Richmond, Virginia, works to equip individuals and communities to effectively engage in the work of reconciliation. I met David on my second Telos group trip to the American South, where we visited sites of African American and Indigenous history, and he reminded me tonight we also first met each other dancing in Congo Square in New Orleans. It's a great way to get to know people, is to just throw us into dancing together right away when you don't know anyone. So talk about icebreaker. When we're back in person, maybe that's what we'll do at Courageous Conversations. Anyways, some of our fellow travelers from that trip are also here with us tonight. Welcome, we're so thrilled to have you. David leads workshops to initiate conversations and communal problem solving to transform communities into reconciling communities. David, we're so glad you're here. So tonight, how this will flow. Oh, hi, David. Thank you for being here.
Hey, glad to be here.
I'm gonna keep going with some housekeeping, and then we'll get talking. After our time with David, we'll take a short 5-minute intermission to stretch and refill our refreshments. Then have a full hour for breakout dialogue and share outs guided by our facilitator core. And then we'll share the questions before intermission so you won't be surprised. You can chew on them a little before we start. And at the very end, before 9 p.m., we will all come back together to share out and conclude with a closing word from Zena. So tonight we are recording this presentation. We'll remain muted for this first part until breakouts. You're welcome to turn off your camera to listen, but we really love to see your faces in breakout dialogue. We will post the video afterwards on our website, and our partners at 365barrington.com are publishing takeaways from each session too, so look for those to come out later. Please share these resources with friends who can't be here tonight, but may find these things useful. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce my co-host and beloved pastor of the Community Church of Barrington, Reverend Dr. Zena Jacques.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We are so very glad you are here with us this evening. Now, I am not a very good cook. I can stop hunger, but that's different than being a good cook. But I love to try. And I have all kinds of equipment and tools in my kitchen. But if I'm going to fillet a piece of fish, I do not need my Cuisinart. And if I am going to knead bread, I do not need my fabulous, wonderful slicer. I have to know what tool to pull out for my intended goal. And sometimes I make mistakes. I don't really know the difference between a fillet knife and some other kinds of knives. My husband has a real huge collection of kitchen knives. So sometimes I make mistakes and I have the wrong knife, and you can tell I've had the wrong tool. But I'm learning and I'm getting better. And actually my mistakes are among the best moments of teaching. The best heuristic device I have is when I make a mistake, someone guides me and I learn, and the next time I can do it better. I feel a lot like that about tonight's work. The work of calling in and calling out is a matter of knowing what tools to use in what moment. Which one will work for me now? And as Jess just quoted, binary choices are not it. We usually have a drawer full of tools, but there's one or two that are going to be better for the circumstances. So I have to ask myself, you have to ask yourself, what tool do I need in this circumstance? Do I call somebody in a private conversation and tell them about how a hurtful remark affected me? Do I call someone out in a public arena with witnesses? What's my goal? How can I speak truth or offer correction in a way that will be received? I really think about relationship and calling in. There's got to be something durable about that relationship as I call in. So tonight, we're going to explore some of this. We're going to think about the best tools we have for correcting fallacy and untruth. We're going to think about the tools we have for deepening the understanding of those around us who may have understandings with which we deeply disagree. We're going to understand the difference in calling out and calling in, and we're going to fit a toolbox so that you and I have what we need when the moment strikes and what we hear needs attention, needs correction. With that said, it is my distinct pleasure to pass the mic, as it were, to my brother and my friend, David Bailey. David, we are so delighted to have you here this evening. Can you start this dialogue by sharing how you come to this work of reconciliation and your thoughts on this topic? Then Jess and I have some questions that we'll toss about.
Well, good. Well, again, I'm so glad to be here with you all. Love Jess, and I've actually been an admirer of Dr. Reverend Zena from a distance, and so it's been a great honor to be with such a regal woman and to be in the presence of greatness. It's really great. So, and I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and just a little bit about my story to kind of help you understand some context is that I grew up rich my whole life. When I was about 8 years old, I was really slow in learning how to read, and my dad got me this like second grade level reading Bible. It said like, hey, if I'm gonna get him to read two chapters of the Old Testament, two chapters of the New Testament, Proverbs and Psalms every day, and maybe he'll learn how to read. God will help teach you how to read. Well, I was an adult. I was like, Dad, that probably was a lot for an 8-year-old, but I did learn how to read, guys, and eventually how to do that. And so I learned. I grew up in a Christian household, right? And so another thing that happened when I was 8 was um, my parents were really involved in urban ministry, and so we lived in the suburbs where minorities would move when they would like leave the city, and it was like the working class suburbs. But I'm a racial ethnic minority while I'm in the suburbs. But my dad, who grew up in the hood, did a lot of like ministry in the hood, and we started to go to church literally in a housing project. And so it was a community center in the housing projects. And so we were almost like the Cosby kids going to church in the hood, right? And I remember being like, man, I don't want to hang out with those stinky kids, you know? And like, um, I really, those stinky kids actually became my friends. And when you're like young that way, I basically ended up having friends. People had a lot more money than me. People had a lot less money than me. Another thing that happened, I started playing the piano around 8. I became the church piano player at 11. At 14, I started playing gigs, and it opened up a world of like gated communities and country clubs, and it just kind of expanded my world. And I really got a chance to be with all different types of people. And so this is a little bit of like, I really realized that, particularly in Richmond, Virginia, you know, that was the former capital of the Confederacy. And one of my hopes is the work that we do is that Richmond will become more known as the capital of reconciliation. And so this is like a significant heartbeat behind me. And so, I come from this context, um, from a Christian faith informed space. And, I've been a minister, for a very, very long time, but I oftentimes don't like look like a minister. Like I'm kind of creative. I do a lot of different things. I don't like wear it on the sleeve, particularly like when you're on planes. Like a way to shut down a conversation really quickly is to be like, "Hey, yeah, I'm a minister," and they'd be like, "Hey, let me turn around." But one of the things that's happened for me in my life, I've heard a lot of conversion stories. I've heard stories of people who had what they might have been atheists and they became a person of faith. I've heard conversion stories of people who have were like Christian and turned Muslim, or they were Muslim and turned Christian. I've heard conversion stories of people that might have had like an addiction and they became somebody that didn't deal with addiction. And here's something that I've learned in the various conversion stories and that I've heard. I've yet to hear a conversion story where somebody says, somebody convinced me that I was stupid and I decided to change my mind. You realize that, like, a lot of times we try to convert people by convincing them that they are wrong, and then we expect them to change. Oftentimes, like if we really think about our own conversion stories of like why we like certain things or how do we get into something, it's rarely ever um happened by people convincing you that you're stupid and you're wrong. Matter of fact, if somebody comes that way, you tend to kind of double down. You tend to double down. Like there needs to be some sense of love and care that somebody has for you. Like you need to know, even if you're going to entertain what they're saying, that they have to like love and care for you. And so, another way of thinking about this, I've heard somebody say it this way, that people want to know how much you care before they know want to know how much you know. This is the thing, like care and love is really, really key. And a friend of mine named Jason Kane said it this way, that proximity leads to empathy and empathy leads to unity. So oftentimes, like we try to change the other or the person that's different than us by not like drawing in and getting close to them and getting in proximity. And oftentimes we get in proximity that adds risk. There's vulnerability that's there. You could get hurt. You could get rejected. It might not work out well. But actually, when you get in proximity and you get a chance to, I heard a wise man tell me that walking in somebody's shoes is never comfortable, but you get a chance to understand where they're stepping. You know, this is a thing where proximity leads towards empathy. You can have more empathy for folks, but ultimately, this helps to kind of like unify our humanity together, and not even necessarily in a assimilating way, but oftentimes in a complementary way. And so change doesn't oftentimes happen outside of relationship. It doesn't happen outside of love. It might not even add something that I think that really governs my thoughts, whether I am in a secular space or in a multi-faith space. The Christian faith is a faith where it centers around the notion of sacrificial love. Now, I have to be the first to admit this and confess this, that particularly as you deal with issues of race, as you deal with issues of politics, um, issues of class and money and power, I have to be the first to admit that most Christians are not modeling what Jesus modeled. You know, I got a chance to go with Telos to Israel, and I got a chance to talk with people who were um, Muslims, people who were Jewish, people who were Christian, people who were secular, and you know, all the faiths, everybody I talked to had a vision of loving God, had a vision of loving family, even loving your neighbor. But I think there's something that Christians oftentimes forget is that Jesus calls us to love our enemies. Like so, like no matter what you do, you're supposed to engage in love, and not love in a theoretical sense, but love in a proximity type of aspect of things, and not just love in theory, but actually love sacrificially. So when we are like drawing in versus like calling out, a lot of times you can call people out if you're drawing in with love and actually drawing love within a a sacrificial type of way. I know that sounds really, really crazy, but I think that's the only way people change. If you think about the way that you change in your own life, it had to be sacrificial love, whether it's the love of a parent, love of a friend, love of a lover. Like these are the type of things that you do that this is very true of humanity, no matter what faith background you come from. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Even Aristotle, when he was, you know, articulating like some of the ways of persuasion, he says that, you know, there has to be ethos, that's credibility, and like, hey, do I believe like this person? Logos is like, is there a logic or a reason to what's being said? But the biggest thing is like emotions and feelings. Like we are this Trinitarian type of being, right? Like that we need this type of understanding in order to engage. And so it's really, really important that we just don't only try to change people from a distance, but we try to get into their space, walk into their shoes, but even do it as a place of like we genuinely love a person. And this is the thing. I try to really practice genuine interest and genuine love for people, even as I am trying to persuade them to do something that I feel like might ought to be the right thing to do. You know, this idea of like calling out versus calling in, it's almost like sometimes there can be this like pitting against activism or not being activists. And I think this is actually, you know, as a result of, I think we can oftentimes have a limited understanding of what it means to be an activist. I want to just like submit this one thought and idea before, as I engage in my final thoughts at the moment. Um, I want to talk about just different types of activism that can happen, your brand of activism. Um, I believe there's like 5 ways I want to present to you the way that you can kind of engage of like activism is kind of a way of calling out, but there's different ways you can kind of call out. And you're calling out not just for the sake of calling out, but you're actually calling out for the sake of making a change, of making something better, to see something in the world that you don't see. And so one way of engaging in activism, some people are gifted as being systems thinkers. You're someone that says like, hey, I have to like figure out, hey, why is this working? Look at kind of bigger picture of a thing. And you might have the gift of thinking about systems, and you might not do protests, you might not go out and march, but you might be a person that thinks about systems. That's who I am. I'm a systems thinker. I'm a person that kind of like thinks through stuff. I haven't been on one march yet. I don't know if I would be at march. I actually got friends who are activists, and my activist friends, they really exhaust me. Like, I mean, they just like they're like super woke on everything, and like, I love them. I'm with them. They really help me to learn and engage. But like they're the ones that kind of need to do that work. But after they kind of bring attention, a lot of times they aren't necessarily the best people to kind of help build the thing. And so I partner with them to kind of help build some stuff. And we actually work together because we need each other. You know, these kind of like traditional activists that you think about, they're like navigators. They kind of say, hey, here's true north. This is the way that we need to go. When they hit this direction, no matter what, let's go this way. They tend to be kind of prophetic. They tend to be activists to bring attention to this thing, and they kind of like sound the alarm. They ring the bell. They crash the cymbals and say like, hey y'all, we're going the wrong direction. This is where we need to go. And we need people like that. But we need people like that to team up with folks who are systems thinkers. And it's not an either or, it's an and both. But you know what? You might not be a systems thinker, you might not be a navigator, you might be a recruiter, you might be a salesperson, you might be a person that says, hey, come on along. Let's do this thing. This is something that's happening. You might be excited and bring some folks around. Another way of engaging activism is you could be a coaching companion. You might not be the person that's in the ring doing the work in the fight, but you might be the one that says like, hey, take care of yourself, or you're doing a great job, or when it's talking, you're in the corner, like kind of telling that person to like, hey, you could do this. Like there's a role for all of us to be able to play, to make some change for the positive, for the better. Every great athlete, whether Serena Williams to Michael Jordan to Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali, they all had a coach. They had a coaching companion that was along the way. And we need to be that for some people. The last space is an educator. Some of us are people that can take a lot of information and begin to kind of see systems or teach or to educate or to do some stuff. This is like an educational format, a way of thinking about things. This is an activist type of work, right? And it's activists kind of mobilizing people to actually build and to think and to engage. And when we think about this idea of calling in or calling out, there's not just one way of doing it. We're gifted in various different ways, and we all need each other to be to see the kind of change, to be the kind of people, to see the kind of change you want to see in the world. And so those are just my opening thoughts.
Thank you, David. Zena, are you listening? um, I'm going through what you've just presented and thinking, well, I don't know, if all of us here who all want positive change and who want to be able to be an upstander and to call people, not to just call people out, but to be able to speak out when it's important. Um, I don't know that we all identify as being activists per se. So what I like is how you take that definition and you have offered up different ways that we can see ourselves as being active within that practice of upstanding and calling in and calling out, but giving us different places where our talents might help us do that best. I'm thinking, okay, am I the systems thinker or a recruiter? I'm not so sure. But as we dive into this a little bit more, um, you know, this work is hard. So, what are some of the questions we might ask ourselves to discern whether we are in a position to call in or call out someone, or might find another strategic way to approach a situation that calls for response? Zena, David, I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
David, you go first.
Uh, well, I think some of this is that we live in a day of social media where it's so fast. I think our phones. I feel like I'm about to sound like the old guy, but like I feel like our phones have kind of like made us um, less connected. I mean, even when we're together, we oftentimes aren't together because like we're on our phones. And then here's the thing that like I'm not a person that I'm actually not a condoner of violence by any means, but back in the day, we used to like um, watch what we say because somebody could punch us in the face. And so like now that we aren't in like swinging proximity of one another, we say things on these freaking phones that we would not say to anybody that was in swinging distance. And so folks could be so mean through social media and be a totally different person. And so I think a little bit of like when I ask the question is like I think when I think about quote unquote calling people out, I I, I am also asking the question like, hey, what level of relationship do I have with the person? You know, Jessica's my friend. Like if I have her cell phone, I'm not gonna just publicly shame her on social media. And I don't see people responding in that way. Like even just like from a methodology, you just go into a different mode when you're like publicly shamed. I'm gonna call my friend up and give her a holler and just see, hey, help me understand. There's another space that like Jesus was a carpenter, you know, and when you are working on stuff, like back in the day, I don't know if they didn't have glasses back in the day. And so when you're doing carpentry, it's easy to get sawdust in your eye. And so this is brilliant metaphor that's in there that says, hey, when you go to call somebody else, it's fine to call somebody else, but when you're at work, you're working together, there's going to be reasons why people are going to hurt you. They're going to do some things. You can call them out, but make sure you get the plank out of your own eye before you try to get the sawdust out of their own.
Mhm.
And that actually helps you. Like I try to do some self-examination when I try to do this, and then I ask myself the question like, hey, how would I like this approach in that way? And I think that's the type of thing. And I think, hey, if I'm feeling some type of way, if I have some type of relationship, I owe the respect of our friendship to do that. Like, and I don't really trust friendships that aren't tested off of conflict. Like I want some friendships that have endured some conflict. And I think that's a really important thing to understand and know and to do.
I, I love the question, Jess. There's a quote by a Nebraska journalist. Her name is Ashley Ostru, and she says this. Of course, oh, thanks, Jess. Of course, the act of calling in demands a lot of emotional labor. It's important to remember that those who are being oppressed have a right to their anger and are under no obligation to do the work of educating the people participating in their oppression. Calling in is a tool for teaching others in safe situations. And it can be particularly useful if you are someone from a privileged group who can do the work of calling in others who share your privilege and challenging their problematic beliefs. I love the opening line that calling in demands a lot of emotional labor. Um, calling it, sorry, you've got two religiously trained people tonight, at least. So there's this other text in Matthew 18, it's the 15th verse, and I love it. I think it's the perfect metaphor. It says, if somebody offends you, go to them yourself, just you, just the two of you. And if you've won them over, the text says you've got a brother. But it goes on to say, if it doesn't work, take somebody else with you, one or two people, so that there's this community. So again, that's calling in, that's the personal, that's the relationship. The third round, it says, but if that doesn't work, then tell the church. And that's the calling out. But I love that there are these two rounds of calling in before the calling out. I also, there are just a couple of other things. I think if you are in power, if you are part of the power structure, your first reaction should be to call in, because that is a dominant place. And already, just what David said, if you shame somebody, you've lost them. So if you've got power, call people in. The second thing is, if you have tried and the problematic behavior doesn't shift, but you've tried, then maybe the space is for calling out. But again, remembering that there are these tools in our drawer and we have to think about the circumstances and the relationship. So those are my thoughts.
So I've heard you, underscore the importance of calling in and calling out, not being an either or good or bad, but that we have to be able to be introspective first and figure out, what it is that we're trying to call out, and kind of figure out if it's something that we need to be aware of it ourselves first, and then to begin to be in conversation and dialogue, and put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and see what that might feel like before we move into any larger or more greater way of naming the harm or naming what's bothering us. Um, what does this look like in practice in relationship? Okay, let's say, David, you talked about me as being a friend, and if I've done something that has harmed you or hurt you, that you would pick up the phone and call me. But like, what does that look like? Am I signing up for, multiple conversations? Am I signing up for a one and done? What is a fair expectation entering into that, and how will I know? How will I know if it's worth my time? How will I know if it's effective?
Well, you know, I live on the basic presupposition that conflict resolution is a basic human need.
Mm.
You just can't go through life without any type of like conflict resolution, and conflict resolution skills. So I think some of the things that I just would start off with is to understand that this is all culturally influenced. It's kind of like you think about family of origin. Let's kind of go into a metaphor of like a marriage or a partnership of some sort. If you go to a therapist, they ask like, "Hey, how did your family deal with conflict?" Some families throw things. Other families don't talk about it. People have natural, even but then you could go personality wise. Some people are fight, some people are flight, some people are freeze whenever there's tension or whatever comes in that space. And this is true of culturally. So some cultures are more direct, others are indirect. Some cultures um, are more they are more hierarchical, and other more are more egalitarian. And so I think it's important to exercise some cultural intelligence to try to understand, like, hey, am I approaching to somebody that's a lot more direct, or somebody that's like indirect? If you're going direct to a person that's indirect, you come off as being aggressive. If if you're from somebody that's from a direct culture, you come off being passive aggressive, and that can be very infuriating. And so it's just kind of like exercising some of that cultural intelligence, knowing kind of where you are in a hierarchical space when you're crossing cultures. These are helpful because a lot of times what can happen is you can talk past one another, or you can kind of like culturally pass one and trigger one another in a different spaces. And so, you know, I'm of a I think 3 rounds is a good little round. I think like trying to say like, hey, everything is always resolved in the first go round. Sometimes it's just a misunderstanding, like, oh, this is what I understood. The other thing I would also say is repeating back what you hear, like what you think you heard, and asking for permission to say, hey, just like, this is what I heard. Tell me, did I get you right in this way? People feel heard and understood in that way. When you do that 99.9% of the time, like slowing down actually helps you to go further, faster. and it's very counterintuitive, but people feel heard and understood.
I'm aware that we have a lot of teachers in our Courageous Conversations, Courageous Communities um, community. And one of the things I've learned from my friends who are teachers is that you aren't everybody's best teacher. And so is it worth it? And how do I know? One, no teacher wants a class of 64 students, right? So you can't, none of us can take on the whole world. I think we have to be careful about our own bandwidth. And at any given point, how many people can I really go down this road with? And I want to say it's not more than the fingers on your hand. It is emotional labor. So we have to be careful about how we expend our energy. And two, you have to ask yourself, am I the right person? Am I the right teacher in this moment? Am I the right sojourner with this person in this moment? Because if you're not, and you take up that space, you may be taking up that space from the person who really can reach them. So again, that introspection on my part, is this my call? Is this my moment? And be okay if the answer to that is no, because that teacher will come along. What's our individual capacity?
But you're not, I'm just going to ask something here.
Mhm.
You're not suggesting, however, that we sit back and let the teacher come along, or in the hope that the teacher will come along if we're witnessing something that we think needs to be addressed, right? It's
No,
or
just,
what are you saying? Clarify that for me.
I appreciate that. I have said countless times, my body is smarter than my brain. My body knows injustice much more quickly than my brain because my stomach falls or my heart rate increases or I begin to perspire. My body is reacting to something and I have to pay attention to that because my brain might try to talk me out of it. So I want to be in touch with all of me, like what is disquieting me and am I being called into that? So no, I'm not suggesting taking the cheap or chicken way out. Let the teacher come. I am asking what is being moved, not triggered, what is being moved in me, and is this my moment? Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
I have a question for you and David. We're in a time of calling out equality, and sometimes that calling out can feel like betrayal. Is it? What's the difference between calling out and truth telling or calling out and speaking truth to power?
That's a really interesting question, and I think I am a little. I'm gonna just start where I'm starting from in this space. I feel like I need to be a little professional in this way. A friend of mine labels a lot of the kind of like social media calling out as social slacktivism. Like when people, um, you know, I feel like true activism or true trying to make change, like has to be. Yeah, I think when you try to do long lasting change, it has to be more than just like, hey, let me type in something and call people out with 140 characters. I mean, I think about like what W. Du Bois did and so many of those folks. Um, they definitely like spoke to the power, but they started NAACP in 1908. I'm sorry, 1909, and it was like 1954 by the time the board versus education happened. And so sometimes like people aren't really actually speaking truth to power. What they're really doing is just kind of like relieving stress for themselves and just kind of saying something and not actually like trying to do something to make change. Now, I say all that to say that there are people that are actually using the power of social media to actually bring substantive change. And so I think one of the questions that you want to ask is like, hey, what am I really doing here? Am I doing this because I just kind of want to blow off of steam? Or actually, am I like doing this because I really am trying to make some change? If you're going to really make change, you have to do this in the long haul, you know, and kind of be in the long haul for that, whatever that is.
Mhm. Jess, do you want to add anything?
I'm getting distracted by all the chat going on the side. You know, I think I think that I'm gonna. Here's my personal story, and it has nothing to do really with what we're talking about, other than therapy and being in relationship with somebody. But what I have found is in let's say my relationship with my husband, for example, when he doesn't tell me something that I've done that's bothering him and he sits on it for weeks and then it all kind of blows up out of nowhere, that feels like a betrayal.
Mhm.
Where I'm like, come
Yeah.
on, we're in a relationship together. Why couldn't you just tell me in the moment? And there's a lot of reasons why he couldn't tell me in the moment. Perhaps because he was afraid of my response, which of course would be defensive and angry and mad and all those crazy things. But once we do get to the point where we're honest with one another and I get over my emotional stuff, right? It no longer feels like a betrayal. It feels like I actually want to be in this with you and I want to move forward with you. And so I think for me, when I'm thinking about times where I've been called out on serious stuff or silly stuff, um, my initial response is usually embarrassment. And it's usually me wanting to defend myself. But if I just take a couple breaths and I sit for a minute and I'm thinking, all right, this person isn't going to do this because they want to embarrass me. It's because there's something that needs to be righted here. And so when I take that stance, I can usually like let it all go and start to lean in, like David said, and listen for for the truth that is coming out of that request, right? So yeah, it can feel like a betrayal, but also not sharing can feel like a betrayal. And so I like to lean into the idea that if we're in good relationship with each other as neighbors, as lovers, as partners, as friends, as parents, as children, then we're going to be honest with one another in that loving kindness kind of way that David described early on. So yeah, I mean that's where I'm sitting. I'm not sure where everyone else is sitting, but that's that's what came to mind for me on that question.
You remind me, Jess, both you and David in your comments about something Brene Brown has talked about. She's talked about the difference in being shamed and feeling shame. And it's come up. It came up just then, Jess, in your comments. She says you can't shame people into being better. David said that earlier. It's just not an effective tool. She also says it's our responsibility, the one who's calling in or out. It's our responsibility for experiencing and regulating our own emotions to move through them in a productive way without defensiveness, without doubling down, all the things you just mentioned. So when we are called out, when we are called in, what here's the question. How do we helpfully engage these feelings and experiences? What's the right posture when you're being called out or being called in? If defensiveness and anger is not the best posture, what is?
I could just jump in. I mean, so one of the things that um, so my particular area of focus in the work that we do at Airbond is particularly building reconciling communities in areas of race, class, and culture. And whenever you deal with issues of race, class, and culture, it's important to understand that we all have feelings of fear, anger, grief, and shame. And these things are like always present. If you're wealthy, there could be, and you're in a place where you're crossing culturally, amongst poor folks, there could be feelings of grief, anger, fear, and shame. If you are a person of color who um, is in dealing with something racial amongst a predominantly white space, you could be dealing with emotions, fear, anger, grief, and shame. If you're white, you could be dealing with fear, anger, grief, and shame. And these are things that are really, really important. And like, if all of a sudden I just started to kind of like go off out of nowhere, I was sure that did something unusual, you all would say, like, man, that's kind of weird. Why is David doing that? But if I told you, hey, I lost someone, or this thing happened ahead of time, then there's a place of empathy. You got a category for that. So I think it's really important to understand that we all need to be aware that even like in the grief process, like anger is part of the grief process. Sometimes shame can even be part of it, but like there's different stages of grief. Even when you have with a family and the same family loses the same family member, we don't all go through the process at the same time. And so it's important to understand, hey, not only that other people could be dealing with fear, anger, grief, and shame, and like to kind of be able to see some of those signs and then kind of like respond accordingly. Hey, you know what? I think, you might be would you might be feeling fearful right now? Do you feel like you might get rejected? Do you feel like somebody might call you a racist? Like, are you fearful of any of these things? Or you feel like you might be rejected, or like what might be happening, like to maybe help name that. But then also it's important for you to self-examine your own self.
Yeah.
Am I feeling fearful? Am I feeling shame? Am I operating out of a place of woundedness? And so I think this is like a really significant part, particularly in these particular topics, because this when you see people going off, generally one of those emotions are probably at work somewhere and they
Yeah.
probably aren't even conscious themselves.
Yeah.
I love that. I just saw in the chat that somebody said beginning with I statements is a really great way
That's great.
to start, and I agree with that. That's something I've learned on this journey. Um, some of the things that I've noticed, Zena, you talked about the tools, which I thought was hilarious in the beginning. And if my husband was watching this, which he's not, but he will, I'll make him. Uh, he would laugh because I always use the wrong utensil in the kitchen, hands down, always. The running joke in my house is, Jess, you don't use a spoon to cut bread. Okay, it just is. So now you know. Anyway, when I think about feeling to be able to cut bread with a spoon, it's a lesson, right? It's a learning moment. And you talked about the times where we really mess up are the gems. I mean, any educator knows that that's where we learn, right? Those are the moments. And so for me, once I get over all of those emotions, like Brene is saying, the initial flood of physiological feelings, um, being able to not take something personally, and like David was saying, let's say somebody calls me out for saying something racist. um, I think my initial response years ago would be to say, well, that's not who I am, this is an attack on my character. But once I get over the hump of realizing, well, no, it's not an attack on my character, it's an opportunity for me to learn why what I said was received that way, then I'm in this whole like new world of like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I can get better at this. And I'm kind of applying it also to like that daily practice, right? Like if I mess up today, it doesn't mean I'm going to mess up for the rest of my life. It means that I can try again tomorrow. So, um, so being able to listen and, like David said, repeating back what you've heard to make sure that you are not, when I say you, I am not misstating what I've heard and misrepresenting what I've heard. I think is really exciting and really important. We talked about that last year in Courageous Conversations. Um, this is one of those moments where I feel like our grounding virtues, the two grounding virtues, actually three, because somebody threw up humility, and I agree. Humility is that place, right, where we don't know it all, so we're learning. I don't know it all, I'm learning. I'm going to learn with open ears and an open heart, and hope that I'm being received that way. But This is where the words are really important. Our grounding virtue of words matter are really important. That generous listening is really important. And that position of humility is really important. And so those are the places that I like to lean into in those moments. Can guarantee you I'm not good at it right away. Guarantee you every single time I will fail. But we can keep going.
You remind me that we've been talking a lot about being curious.
Yeah.
What if I could be curious about my own response? What if when I'm angry or I'm feeling wounded, I'm curious instead of reactive? I'm curious about why that's where I went.
Yeah, right. Well, I think the curiosity is where the answer is. So it's like what David said. David said, you know, why am I responding? Because why am I angry by what's just been said to me? Or why am I afraid by what's just been said to me? Following that introspective path in, you know, following that will probably land us with the answer. And then once you're faced with the answer, you know, what do you do with it at that point? There, you know, you've got all this data and information that you can choose to do something with. And I think you're right, Zena, that curiosity is how we figure it out for ourselves. I don't, I mean, we can keep going here, but I also, I want to ask you know, what advice might you give to someone who speaks up and is met with defensiveness or dismissal? I should have my husband on here so he can tell you exactly what to do. But anyways, you are the expert, so I want to hear what you guys say.
David, that smile makes me want to hear what you are going to say.
Well, hey, I just want to, I see, I'm like checking out the chat also. I just want to say that book, The Art of Noticing, is really, really good. It's a lot of practices and that is really good. It's written towards artists, but this whole like theme of like curiosity, I just want to like think like curiosity actually leads to a lot of adventures, right? So I think like look at conflict as an opportunity, not something to avoid, right? And I think that when you have a practice of noticing, a practice of listening, um, I think the smartest person in the room is the person that asks the best questions, not the person that gives the best answers. You know, and so you could memorize things to give great answers, but you know, I try to be the person asking the best questions, at least like learning and being in that space. So I just want to encourage you to like take on that type of posture. And so, you know, what advice might you give to someone who speaks up and is met with defensive and a dismissal? You know, I think again, I think like asking that curiosity to be like, hey, you know, one of the things that I really try to do, particularly if my kind of temperature is rising, or if I'm feeling like I need to be defense, like I was on this one call and this guy did something like out of left field. Sometimes when you feel somebody gets defensive, you feel like you need to get defensive, and you just get escalated in the spiral of defensiveness. And so I am trying to always, I love Dr. Zena just said, like, I actually wrote this down. My body oftentimes knows injustice before my brain does, you know, and I think I'm trying to pay attention to how I'm feeling and what's in that space. But then, you know, again, like I'm trying to like see, okay, when I kind of speak into a thing that's met with defensiveness, say, hey, like, what are you hearing? What, like asking questions, being curious, trying to see what's in it. And again, I'm not trying to convince people through logic, you know, that's not the space. You got to try to ask questions and help people to lead to the conclusion they need to get to.
I, I'm, I want to go back to something David said early, that change occurs in the presence of sacrificial love. And I think sometimes when you are met with defensiveness or dismissal, particularly if you are in the dominant group, it becomes an act of sacrifice to keep going back. Remember, we talked month one of Courageous Conversations about taking winning and losing off the table, that this isn't about winning and losing, that this is about a consistent practice. This sacrificial love is this consistent practice. It's Women's History Month, and I am reminded that the first woman to ever be elected to national office was elected in, I want to be sure I've got the year right, 1916 in Montana. Jeannette Rankin is her name. That was 105 years ago, and we finally have a female vice president, right? 105 years. But Jeannette Rankin must have asked some kind of question somewhere. And this kind of ongoing, even when you're dismissed, to be willing to come back with strength, to be willing to till the ground, even if you're not going to see the tree grow, let alone the fruit be born. So you keep coming back, and you need a community. I love the notion about being a coach, because last week was the 50th anniversary of the Frazier Ali fight. And I watched it again. And if you watch, and Ali lost, as you'll recall, every time he goes back to his corner, they are coaching him. They are encouraging him. And so he was getting his butt kicked by Joe Frazier, but he would go back and get strength from his corner. Who's your corner? Not people who are going to necessarily agree with you. I wish Jean Hansen were on this call. She's my corner. Somebody who call you, who talk to you. But if you're being rebuffed out there, where's your in here? Who are your people who help you with your strength so you can keep going back out? And don't give up. Don't give up.
What advice might you give to someone who's nervous to speak up because they don't want to ruffle feathers, damage relationships, bruise egos?
You know, one of the things like in organizational health, there's a guy named Patrick Lencioni. I think this is a great question. Really, in order to build trust in community, you actually have to have conflict. Because what happens a lot of times is, let's say, for example, we, hey, what are we going to order our pizza for? And I love pineapples and tomato on my pizza. And Zena's already like, shaking her head, But if like Zena doesn't like pineapples and tomato on the pizza and doesn't say anything, then it's going to be a disruptive time. She might be like a little terse or something like that, And I'm like, well, what's the problem? Now, if she speaks up, I'm like, okay, we don't have to do pineapple and tomato, or we can do half of it, or we can there are other toppings that I like. And if I just don't know, and I think, I can't really do anything about it. So I think that's one of the things that we want to constantly be paying attention to is what's our, to speak to it and give people the opportunity to do something. You can't risk anything. I mean, that's the thing, any kind of intimate relationship, you got to risk something. The more intimate you become, the more vulnerable you become. But the thing is, hopefully it's reciprocity that makes something the fruit of rewards that come out of that intimacy and vulnerability.
And the truth of the matter is, and we've said it in any number of ways, you are going to ruffle feathers. It's endemic in conflict. But if I go to somebody and say, I am so curious, and I know this might be tender, but I really want to learn your point of view. The feathers might still be ruffled, but you have positioned it not like, I think you're wrong and an idiot, but instead, I want to try and understand how you got there. Mm-hmm. What's the path that's brought you here? Because the path I'm on has taught me something altogether different, and I don't understand the disconnect. So it's not going to always be smooth. And if at the end you can legitimately say, that's a perspective that is new to me. That does not mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean you support it, but it means you were listening. But don't conflict avoidant is not going to work. It just won't. My turn. Sometimes we hear people say things like, if they approached it differently, if they were kinder or gentler or gave me more benefit of the doubt, that would be more effective. This is, when somebody has called out someone else and the response is, if they could only have been nicer about it. Is that a cop out or is there wisdom behind it? What's the responsibility of the messenger to shift his or her voice? My therapist said to me a long time ago, there's a difference in what you want to say and what you want other people to hear. There's a difference. Where does all this land? What's my responsibility if I'm ready to call out?
I know for me, I try to be, so when I'm trying to communicate, I try to communicate towards effectiveness, And so, like I am not thinking about how I would receive it, but like how other people would hear it and receive it. And so that's what I try to do whenever I communicate about anything. When somebody comes to me and they might kind of come off kind of strong, like for example, I try to honor women well, particularly in the workplace, and try to do certain things. But then, like, I mean, one, I don't feel like my grandma has a saying, the biggest room in the world is room for improvement. So I just try to always have that kind of posture. But I could, like, somebody could come kind of strong with me about being sexist or being misogynistic or something like that. And and it may be true, it might not be true. That kind of doesn't matter. Like, but it's like what kind of matters is like, hey, I try to like lean into that experience and try to like self-examine. But the thing that even if they like it could have been a misunderstanding, whatever the case may be, I try not to judge how they did it because it's telling me a sign that there's a lot of pain. Like this interaction wasn't necessarily about what we're interacting about. There's probably a reason and a story of why they're coming this strong, in this way. And so I try to like realize that, we're here today because how we're wired, because of the environments that we came in, and then the decisions that we made. And like 2/3 of those things have nothing to do with us, right? And so these, like, we're all bringing our story that got us into this very moment here in this particular interaction. And I try to remind myself when again I'm feeling like, man, they kind of came off like a little too strong. I try to give myself permission to feel that, but then I also try to like say like, okay, let me like this is where this person is, and there's probably a wider story behind this. And I brought up the gender thing because there's a power dynamic in that space, and so I think that's like always really important, particularly I think a lot of the time comes off with people in different power dynamics, and so that's kind of where I'm saying what I mean by that.
Yeah. Jess, any thoughts you want to add?
I think for me, the main thing that I've learned is there's two things I feel like that we're talking about here. One is like, what can be my approach to be most effective? Like David said, communicate toward effectiveness. But there are incidences where people are absolutely valid in their anger and and are expressing that anger. And when I'm faced with those moments, I feel like it's not for me to tell them how to express themselves so that I can receive their message more easily or comfortably. So when I think about those moments, the only thing I can control is myself. And like David said, leaning into the why and being curious about why there is anger, there is, a certain way that somebody's expressing themselves that maybe doesn't sit well with me. If I continue to lean into curiosity and learn more about where that's coming from, then I feel like it can serve me well because it can point to the importance of action that's necessary sometimes. So I think like David said, and Zena, I think you said also, when we're faced with these moments, who is the person in the situation who has the more perceived power or the more real power, and how does that affect the dynamic between what's being said and what's being received, and who has the responsibility of choosing wisely their messaging or being valid in their anger and letting it out, right? So I think it's a tough question. And those are the things that are kind of sifting through my head as I'm trying to figure out my answers to that.
We have so many good questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to get to some of them through the questions we're going to ask in small groups. But David, we're already a little past our hour mark and people will want to break. But I want to ask you before we go to break, are there stories of calling in or calling out that inspire you?
I mean, I could tell a story that has transformed me. It was a hard one. I mean, like, so this is back in 2012. I've been started Airbond in 2008, and in 2012, I was getting things were kind of picking up. I got invited to speak at a pretty prestigious university on conflict resolution and reconciliation. I was curating a thing. I was actually one of the key people that was a part of this deal. And it's like sometimes, like when you're, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're hearing the words, you think you're talking about the same thing, but you're not.
Mm.
And I was like way out my league, very incompetent about the context of the space, what people were doing. Just didn't know. And I was so like, we were there for like a week. I was like walking around like Mr. Magoo. Had no idea that like I was or Columbo. Like these are like super old like examples, but just the kind of person just messing up all of these like different things. And and I remember coming back that week and just doing a follow-up and be like, oh man, thanks, enjoyed the time. Would love to do this again next year. And they were like, yeah, we know definitely do not want you to come back next year. I was like, what? I had no clue. It was heartbreaking. And so I was talking with a friend of mine, who I was partnering up with a friend of mine in this particular area. She's a Korean woman. And she was like, hey, I was trying to tell you the whole time that you were stinking up the joint. But, her cultural way of doing it was very different. I just didn't understand. And this was like I was in a thing where I'm supposed to be like culturally competent. And so this gets even more embarrassing. It gets even more embarrassing because the very thing that I was supposed to be quote unquote an expert on, I literally like didn't. And it was super, super embarrassing. And so she gave me the gift of one, being honest with me, two, saying like, hey, I know your heart, I'm gonna stick with you, but you even kind of embarrassed me in this space and you actually hurt me in this space, but she kind of stuck with me, right? And so if it wasn't for her doing that, I literally couldn't be where I am today, And I think it also kind of like her kind of both calling out and calling in actually like literally is something that's like shaped me. And this is almost, what this is 2020, it's almost 9 years, almost 10 years later, So I just want to encourage, you never know what happened. And I'm pretty sure she took I know she took major risks to have this conversation, but it's a gift to me that has really got me into this moment. It's one of the most formative and transformative times in my life.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Zena. This has just been a delight for me. We have so many comments and questions coming through on the chat, and I know we need to move into our intermission, and so I will read through them when I have a second, and maybe we can circle back to them at the end. But before we take a short break, we wanted to share the questions we're going to be discussing together in our breakouts, so you can start pondering them. And please stay with us. This is really wonderful to have you all engaged here. Here are the questions. When were you called out? and it was helpful. David just gave us a great example of that for him in his learning. When were you called in and it was helpful? What about those situations helped you learn and grow? The who, the where, when, why, and how? And can you think of a time you wish you could do over where your response was not as effective as you hoped it would be? I have like a million of those. We could talk about those all night. Um, so, as a reminder, this is our chance for dialogue, not debate, listening to understand, practicing curiosity with follow up questions, using our 6 grounding virtues we hold from our friends at On Being Civil Conversations and Social Healing Project of generous listening, humility, patience, hospitality, adventurous civility, and the important part, the most important part, I think, that words matter. So we're going to take a short break and enjoy a new song called Underneath, performed by Nimet Bilal, auntie of our urban consulate colleague Naima, who is here tonight. Listen for the music to end, to come back together. And David, thank you so much for spending such a thoughtful moment with us and sharing your wisdom with us. It's just a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation.
Under your scarf, under your hair, under the clothes that you wear, under your skin, under your nails, under the pose that you veil. You've got a heart and you've got a soul, and sometimes inside it's out of control. You get hurt feelings, sometimes you need a rain, but you're not alone, 'cause I need the same. You're just like me, just wanna breathe. You wanna stand up, you wanna be free, you wanna be loved. Need someone to listen, wanna speak out, wanna be forgiven. You're just like me, underneath. Under your fame, under your friends, you're just a man amongst men. Under your pride, under your skies, under your blessings, under your sins. You got your bones, evidence to stand on, blood coming down the line, a future to count on. You got your mind, so you got your memories, regardless of it all. You just wanna find peace. You're just like me, just wanna breathe. You wanna stand up, you wanna be free, you wanna be loved. Need someone to listen, wanna speak out, wanna be forgiven. You're just like me, underneath. And when the night falls and the world's dark and it seems like all is lost, deep down there's a sunrise. We're all one human soul. You're just like me, just wanna breathe. You wanna stand up, you wanna be free, you wanna be loved. Need someone to listen, wanna speak out, you wanna be forgiven. You're just like me, underneath. You're just like me.
I hope you all had wonderful conversations in your breakouts. Ours was cut short. I was just about to go really deep, and then JP pulled us out. So we'll have to circle back later, my friends. Okay, well, we are going to get into sharing out a little bit from our conversations and type into the chat. And Zena and I are going to read through your report outs, and we'd like to hear from you about this question. When were you called in or called out and it was helpful? And what about those situations helped you learn and grow? Zena, are you back?
I am.
Okay,
I am.
great. So let me just pull up the chat here. Okay, Casey said that Zena was about to deliver her final sentence of brilliance when we were pulled out. Oh.
I put it in the chat for our group.
Okay. Oh, people are leaving. So if you want to type into the chat a response to the question, when were you called in or called out and it was helpful? What about those situations helped you learn and grow?
Claire says, helpful was direct feedback from friend who challenged me.
Yeah. Okay, Carol says, I am a physician and was recently called out by a patient's wife. It was hard to hear, but helped me hopefully be a better communicator and partner in healthcare. Carol, thank you so much for sharing that.
And Stephanie said, our group focused on being called out in general, how that made us feel and how we would have wanted the situation to be addressed.
Claire said, in private over multiple conversations.
And Sam reminds us that all examples from her group highlighted how much trust, two-way trust, is a key.
Casey says, I feel like specifics are so important to this discussion.
And Jeannie said, we talked about how difficult it is to get past the initial defensiveness when we are called out or in, but how very helpful it is when we listen and learn.
Cynthia, I agree. I'm with Cynthia on this. Being called out by my adult children, although mine aren't adult yet, helped me grow both personally and professionally.
And Abigail reminds us, helpful call-outs include recognizing intention versus impact. Sometimes we say do things and don't realize the impact it has, even if our intention is good. So when people recognize that we may not have had any malicious intent, but still can call out the impact, that's helpful. I want to do the next one because Sam and I have nieces and nephews that come and get us. So Sam is responding to Cynthia and says it's not only her kids, but her siblings' kids. I can say amen to that.
I agree. I was telling a story. Many people who've been on this journey with me for a while know this, but I feel like in the beginning of my journey of trying to figure all this out, I was called out with the raise of one eyebrow. It was a look, it was a side eye basically that I was given in response to something that I said. And I remember looking at it and being like, oh, I think I need to go think about what I just said. And it stuck with me ever since.
Cynthia says we talked about how perhaps our country's social constructs impact our reactions to being called out.
Yeah, that conversation was, why is our initial response embarrassment or shame when we're actually in a moment of learning? Well, shouldn't that be celebrated? Carol said, our group trusted each other in this short time to share very personal events. We are full of curious people who are interested in growing. Thank you, Carol.
Kelly, I was called in when a friend was able to share with me how my lack of communication affected her. I was so grateful that she took the risk to be vulnerable and give me the chance to be a more responsive and attentive friend. It gave me a valuable opportunity to reflect on the kind of person I want to be, how I was falling short, and how I can get better.
Stephanie, yes. It was a Black woman who gave me the eyebrow raise, if that was your question.
Catherine Ray, learning from subtle callouts and corrections is a blessing. Catherine, I know you and you offer those subtle callouts as well.
Tamara said, our group shared how it is more difficult to be called out in public and can make you more defensive. I shared how my actions can have a different impact on customers of color than I intended, but that I need to own the impact. Thank you, Tamara. In our breakout, Vincent E was cut off as well. So please, Vincent, feel free to share on chats.
Casey said that in the breakout group he was in, there was a discussion about calling in is often private and being called out public. Now we talked in this group about often when you call out, you're calling out systems as opposed to individuals. You may be speaking to an individual, but you're really pointing to misogyny or racism or homophobia or some system of oppression. That's indeed what's being called out.
Claire said, we heard a lot of stories in our group that were one-on-one corrections. They felt embarrassing in the moment, but then led to positive self-reflection and change that lasted for a long time.
Megan said, I'm a teacher and I was recently called out by a parent on email. I phoned the parent right away and it really helped to talk rather than to continue to email. It was helpful to realize that something I said with the best of intentions was understandably
perceived
in a different way. And there were several things in the chat just about social media. And is it helpful for calling in and calling out? And I think Megan's comments here are really wise, that you cannot tell intent in that social media space. And so intent and impact are going to be mediated very differently when it is when it is not in such a public arena.
Yeah, definitely. Casey's talking about anxiety and how that manifests itself, and it isn't unnatural to being called out in front of a bunch of people.
Sam goes back to Catherine's comment about the subtle call outs that Sam has learned to ask for them. So when you get that side-eye glance, instead of leaving it alone, say, oh, there was a slight change in your expression. What might I learn?
Purnima said, our group was grappling a bit with the difference between calling in and calling out, and whether calling out is necessarily a negative thing. And to that point, I just want to go back to the idea that it's not a binary thing, right? That it's not good or bad, that there's their tools, and that, it sounds to me, when I was thinking back on our conversation that Zena and David had, that calling in are like the first steps of being in relationship, and that calling out happens maybe to institutions when institutions are being contradictory to what they're saying versus their actions.
Erin says, my husband called me out on something hurtful I had said to someone else, not with accusation, by expressing surprise. And his questioning approach made me truly evaluate what I had said and realize that he was right in calling me out on my microaggressions, especially because I myself had suffered similar microaggressions, which of course can pile up to be super hurtful and do a lot of damage.
Thank you, Erin. Yes, the surprise, I feel like actually works really well to make you pause for a minute and think, okay, wait, what just happened here? What did I do? Just one big yes.
Yes. I'm wondering, our time was so short, we didn't get to the do-overs, but I'm wondering if when your body reminds you that maybe that conversation didn't go the way that I wanted, if that's where do-overs can come in, even in the quiet of our own secret time. And then if there is enough impetus and desire after we've thought through it, to engage the person and say, this just remained with me. And I am curious what a do-over looked like, or what can I learn? I think that do-over question, although we did not get to it, and I think it's worth pondering.
I love that idea of asking for a do-over. I mean, how many people need to do that with their spouses on a daily basis? But when you're in conversation about really tough topics, or where you've hurt and you're still carrying it, I think being in relationship with somebody and asking for a do-over is brave, and maybe they'll say no, and then you have to figure out how to carry that for yourself. But maybe they'll say yes and invite you into conversation again, and get somewhere through that. I love that. I know that I feel like I've got 1,000 do-overs that I'd like to do. So I think we keep leaning in is my cheer for tonight.
My friends, we are at the end of our time, and though we are going to spend a 30-minute period, if you wish to hang out after the music, just stay on and we'll come right back. But I am curious what this night has brought you. I hope you have a piece of paper in front of you. I hope that you will write down one thing that you want to hold on to tonight. It could be a question. It could be something that is living in you as not yet resolved and you want to ponder it. Write the question down. And remember, I said, know who's in your corner. Find the folks in your corner and tell them about tonight, and tell them about this question that remains with you, that you want to continue to follow and deepen your learning. You might write down something that was an aphorism or a maxim or a thought that you find really important. I believe in Post-its on the bathroom mirror so that I can repeat it to myself in the morning to remember to push it deep into my soul so that it becomes my truth. Or you might have engaged with somebody in your small group and you thought that was really interesting. I'm going to follow up with them, because the truth of the matter is this calling in and calling out is a process. It is never one and done. It is always a process of learning. And so the question tonight is, will we practice the process? Will we practice the grounding virtues? Will we practice curiosity? Will we practice do-overs? Will we pursue what was turned up or turned over in our beings tonight, but not yet settled? Because that means something has been activated and we have to pursue it. I'm so grateful for this community so that I know I don't have to walk alone. I'm so grateful for the ones who will call in and call out in subtle and other ways that I might grow. So this night, I invite you, here's my little Post-it right here, that you write down the thing that you don't want to forget and place it where you'll see it, so that that seed will grow deep in your soil and produce fruit for a long, long time. You are worthy of the work, worthy of the time to grow good fruit, and you'll be a blessing to those around you as you share the fruits of your labor. We are so grateful you've joined us, so grateful you've been spurred. Come back next month, keep coming back, so that we might continue to grow together as we engage in becoming courageous community. Thanks, everybody. Good night.